11 days from Election Day. Today also marks the 9th day of in-person early voting at about 420 sites across North Carolina. As of 8 a.m. today, more than 2.3 million voters had cast ballots in this election. That's a 30% turnout statewide, but millions of registered North Carolinians have not yet made their voices heard in 2024. We encourage all voters to make a plan to cast their ballot between now and Election Day, November 5th. We have seen some lines in some parts of the state since early voting began, but overall, this has been an extremely smooth first half of the early voting period. This is a testament to the preparations by the dedicated election professionals across our state and the dedicated poll workers who staff these voting sites in service to their neighbors and community. I'd also like to acknowledge that the fact that things are going smoothly is also a testament to the voters and campaigners who have shown civility and a recognition that every eligible voter deserves a peaceful opportunity to exercise their right to vote. To those who have not yet voted, the in-person early voting period continues through 3 p.m. Saturday, November 2nd in every county. Sites and schedules are available through the early voting site search tool on the NCSB website, ncsbe.gov. Please remind North Carolinians that if they are not registered to vote, they can register and vote at the same time at any early voting site in their county through November 2nd. That is the last chance to register and vote, as registration is not allowed on Election Day. That all said, I want to make a direct plea to voters from the 25 disaster counties in western North Carolina who were displaced by the storm and may not currently be living in their home county. You can still vote. But if you are not going to be able to vote in your home county during the early voting period or on Election Day, you must act quickly. You should request an absentee by mail ballot now, and I do mean now, to be delivered to wherever you are currently staying temporarily. You can do that by going to votebymail.ncsbe.gov. Again, that is votebymail.ncsbe.gov and filling out the absentee request form. Once you get your ballot, you can mail it back to your County Board of Elections if you think it will be able to make it by the deadline of 7:30 p.m. on election night, November 5th. If you don't think it will make it back to your County Board of Elections in time, you can drop off your completed ballot at any early voting site or any County Board of Elections office in North Carolina. As a reminder, though, this special accommodation to drop off your ballot at any early voting site or any elections office in the state is only for voters in the 25 western North Carolina counties. If you are not from one of these disaster-affected counties, you must either mail back your absentee ballot or drop it off at one of your county's early voting sites or your County Board of Elections. Additionally, for those voters affected by Helene, if you can make it back to your home county, you can still vote in person during the early voting period or at your assigned precinct on Election Day. Finally, I just want to talk a minute about Election Day voting sites. Across North Carolina, more than 2,600 polling places will be open for voters on November 5th, including the vast majority of planned polling sites in western North Carolina. Thanks to all of the emergency workers, law enforcement officials, and volunteers, conditions are improving. At one point, we thought we would need as many as 15 secure tents in the disaster areas. As of this morning, we believe there will be only a need for 7, 4 in Yancey County and 1 each in Buncombe, Burke, and Haywood counties. So like I've always said, when a disaster strikes, we don't stop elections. We figure out how to proceed. And that's exactly what we have done. And with that, I will take your questions.
All right, it looks like the first question from Dan Parsons is in the chat. There was a lot of talk about a $5 million pot of money for opening early voting sites yesterday at the General Assembly. Is that money available for Western counties that might need it, given the new mandate to open 1 site per 30,000 registered voters? And can you address that bill from the State Board of Elections perspective?
Certainly. There, in the original Disaster Relief Act passed a couple of weeks ago unanimously by the legislature and signed into law by the governor, there was $5 million allocated for the conduct of elections in these 25 disaster relief counties or disaster affected counties. And we have utilized some of those funds for messaging, for printing, for some technology needs. But we do still have funding available, so we will be reimbursing or distributing those funds to the counties. The bill that was passed yesterday regarding the number of early voting sites created a ratio of 1 site per 30,000 voters. And as we reviewed the counties and the sites that they have set up, we were able to determine that the act was only to McDowell County, and they will need to set up 1 additional site, and then Henderson County will need to set up some additional sites. So we will be able to assist those counties in the setup of those early voting sites. So I'll emphasize that, as we came into early voting, the start of early voting, there were 80 sites planned in these 25 disaster affected counties. And we were able to open 76 of the 80 planned early voting sites with power, and they have been operating throughout the early voting period and serving voters. So these additional sites that'll go into effect now because of the legislation yesterday, we will work with the counties to get those up and running. But that's why it's a small number that will be affected. And of course, the $5 million that was originally allocated for assistance to these counties and to the state board in supporting the counties, we'll be able to utilize those funds.
Okay, we're going to go to Bronwyn Hales from NHK Japan Broadcasting. You should be able to unmute and ask your question. Bronwyn, if I'm saying that right.
Pat, she also has her questions in the chat a little further down. Do you want me just to answer from that if she's not able to come on?
It looks like she's unmuted. Bronwyn, do you have a question? Do you want to ask in person, or do you want us to just go to the chat? All right, if we don't hear from her, we'll just go to the chat. Yeah, go ahead, Karen. Do you want me to read them to you, or?
Sure.
Okay, do you feel that voter turnout so far, mail and in person, has been affected in the damaged counties? Are you seeing any differences in turnout numbers between affected and unaffected counties? And regarding misinformation in the wake of Helene, do you feel it bothers the board's efforts for a fair and secure election? On the first 2, I can provide that information later this morning. So if you want that information, just feel free to shoot me an email. I'm sure I'm going to get a ton of emails right now. But yeah, we do have that information and can provide it if you just shoot me an email. So the other one, Karen, regarding misinformation in the wake of Helene, do you feel it bothers the board's efforts for a fair and secure election?
I will go to the other questions, and as Pat said, he can provide the actual data that puts it right there in front of you of how the turnout's been. What most of the affected counties are seeing is tremendous turnout. I know in McDowell, they have seen more turnout each day than in 2020 when we were setting records across the state in terms of turnout. So, we certainly are seeing folks participate and engage. They're still, some of the counties are lagging behind, and the data will help you understand where those are. But there is tremendous turnout. We are setting records in North Carolina. Our first day of early voting was the largest first day of early voting that we've seen, and that breaks a record in 2020. I want to caution everyone as you report out on absentee by mail statistics, be mindful that 2020 was unique because of the pandemic. And so we saw more use of absentee by mail as the voting method of North Carolinians than we've ever seen and probably will ever see. We had more than 1 million people who cast their ballot absentee by mail. Now, in 2016, we were right around 200,000 ballots that were cast absentee by mail, and we are seeing a larger use of that voting method for this presidential election by comparison. So, I think those are the apples to apples that need to be compared, not anything to 2020 in terms of absentee by mail voting. With regards to misinformation in the wake of Helene, there certainly has been a lot of misinformation out there. And I think much of it has been targeted more to the relief efforts than to voting. Hopefully we've been able to get the word out about what the options are to the affected North Carolinians in the western part of our state. We have seen a large outpouring just from the voters themselves coming to the county boards of elections, making sure that they can still be a poll worker, making sure that they're going to be able to cast their ballot. So the interest is there, and we're trying to make sure that we do get the word out. Early on, we set up a dedicated webpage, ncsbe.gov/Helene. We continue to keep that updated. We continue to have these media availabilities. We have launched a communication campaign through PSAs, ads, and different things. Those have been running print ads, radio ads, social media, digital billboards, all sorts of information so that we can make sure that those North Carolinians in those affected areas know that voting is open and available to them and what their options are.
All right, looks like Matthew Sasser from The Insider. Matthew, you should be able to unmute and ask your question. Matthew, there?
Senate Bill 132 that the legislature passed yesterday. Just given that this was passed halfway through the early voting kind of period, are there any difficulties that this legislation has created, and how are you planning to kind of overcome kind of the kind of quick timeline that this bill creates?
I'm glad that the legislature has such confidence in our abilities because this is a quick pivot that we're going to have to pull off. But these are dedicated election professionals who are, committed to carrying out the law as it is written. And so that is what we will do. They have been working since yesterday afternoon when the legislature took their vote. We have been in communications with them. It is difficult in this final period to identify secure sites that have adequate parking, that are ADA compliant, and that are in areas where people can access for voting. So we are working with them to identify if there are sites available. If not, we will continue to work with our emergency management partners to potentially erect tents if that's what needs to be done in order to meet the requirements of the legislation. The other difficulty, and they started making their phone calls yesterday, is to get a sufficient number of workers. We have to remember that training of those workers for the early voting site happened weeks ago, many weeks ago. And so, the supply of those people who are adequately trained is very small. And so they're going to have to look at shifting folks who are working at current sites potentially to have experienced workers, potentially do some last minute training, or see if there are election day workers who are willing to come in and do early voting work and make sure that they are up to speed on the differences between the early voting processes and the election day processes. But here's the thing. We have seen these folks be resilient. This is tough. It is another big ask in a time where they've already been stretched thin, but they are committed, and they are committed to the voters and making sure that they are able to serve the voters. And that's what they will do.
Great. Thank you.
As a reminder, if you have a question, put your name in the chat. We're going to go to Brendan from WTKR. Brendan, you should be able to unmute and ask your question.
Part of the state. Is there any concern that there will be delays in the state's ability to report results, which I know are unofficial on election night, but yeah, could it take longer for results to be posted on election night due to the issues in the western part of the state?
That's a great question, and one we've been getting asked along the way. We do not anticipate any issues getting results in on election night in any county across the state. We have procedures in place to accommodate that are already on the books. We are working with our emergency management partners and local law enforcement in case folks need escorts back in because of the the road conditions or what have you. There are provisions within our law already where we can have a return of materials after the next day, but we can still get results in that night through a call-in system. So some of the affected areas may have to exercise that. So we'll look at what works best for these counties and their precincts. But with every county, we need to remember polls close at 7:30 p.m. If there are voters in line, they will be given the opportunity to vote. And so the polls may be late in actually closing and them being able to shut down their sites. As I heard a director say yesterday, they're going to shut down their sites and leave it the way that they found it. So we don't leave it in a mess. And so we have to get those materials secured and returned back to the County Board of Elections. And that process is going to take time. This is how elections operate no matter the circumstances. And so folks should be realizing that we do not modem in results. So there are no instant results. At 7:30 p.m., when the polls close, we will release the absentee by mail results. The law now provides that we are to close the early voting tabulators at that point in time and cannot upload those results until after the polls have closed. So as precinct results are being uploaded, so will the early voting in-person results. And that'll continue through the night. And we just have to be mindful that the vast majority of results are not going to be published on our website until the 9:30 to 11 p.m. time frame on election night, just because of the sheer logistics of what it takes to get the materials and the results transported from the precincts to the County Board of Elections office, and then their checks and audits before they upload results to make sure that everything is accurate. So the vast majority of results, unofficial on election night from all 100 counties, will show up between 9:30 and 11 p.m. And of course, there will be other situations where we might be a little later into the night.
All right. AP Dillon, hold on one second. I see your question in the chat. We can get you the numbers in the 25 Western counties for early voting. I'm going to unmute you now because I think you have another question. AP, if you're there, go ahead and unmute.
Email over to Colin. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Who's next? Anna Kramer. Hold on one second. All right. Anna, you should be able to unmute and ask your question.
Hopefully you can hear me okay. I wanted to ask exactly how many early voting sites will have to be added in Henderson and McDowell. I'm assuming 2 in Henderson and 1 in McDowell, but I wanted to clarify that. And I also wanted to ask if I know the RNC had threatened a lawsuit against Henderson County if they didn't add extra early voting sites. So I wanted to ask if you've been in communication with them since all of this to see if they are satisfied or threatening any further measures given the way everything has turned out today and last night.
Paul, would you like to address the RNC part?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead. All right. Well, I can address the entire thing if we need to. So in Henderson County, they had planned a second site already before this legislation. That second site was only going to be open next week for 2 days and only part of the day. That's in the town of Etowah. So the bill now requires them to open 4 total sites, and those sites to be open from next Tuesday until next Saturday, and each site to be open all day long. So each of those weekdays they will be open from 8 a.m. until 7:30 p.m. and on the last day from 8 a.m. until 3 p.m. That last Saturday. So essentially, what it meant for Henderson County is that they have to open 2 brand new sites for that period of time and extend that second site to a full 5 days, and those 2 days that where they were planning on being open, extend those to the entire 8 o'clock to 7:30 p.m. Voting day. So for a total of 4. And then in McDowell County, it's 1 new early voting site for that same period of time, those same hours. In terms of the letter that the Henderson County Board of Elections got from the political party, I don't know. We haven't been in direct contact with the Republican National Committee about that letter. Because of the legislation, it seems safe to assume that that letter isn't relevant anymore, but I couldn't really speak to that on behalf of the party.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to go to Chelsea Torres from Fox. Chelsea, you should be able to unmute. Chelsea, you there?
Back to those early voting sites, did you already say what time, or I guess when those would open, the new ones? And then to also go back to those tent sites, you said 7, 1 in Buncombe, 1 in Burke and Haywood, and then 4 in Yancey. I just wanted to confirm that. Thank you.
Your tent count is correct in the counties where those will be located. And then Paul just indicated the provisions within the law is that the counties will open up the early voting sites in McDowell and Henderson County and these additional sites beginning Tuesday through Saturday. I'll also note, and I don't know if we clarified this, McDowell was one of the counties that had an early voting site that was affected by Helene, and they had to close. That was in the community of Old Fort. And so they have had those workers working in the Marion location at their county board of elections. And so now they are trying to identify a space that will accommodate over in the Old Fort area or as close there as they can.
All right, Kurt Devine from CNN has a question in the chat. Yesterday, when legislators were debating the bill to expand early voting in certain western counties, one lawmaker indicated that some election workers in McDowell County had threatened to resign if this bill was passed. Are there concerns about resignations or other issues in McDowell and Henderson?
I think, what I understand and know is that these election professionals reached out to their legislators and others to try to express the difficulties that come about with these quick changes in election law and procedure. And these, especially in McDowell County, she has worked, I believe, more than 30 years in elections, and has worked with her board to consider what is, the best practice, what best serves the people of McDowell County. While they had planned to have an additional site in Old Fort, they knew what the circumstances posed in the Old Fort community. The site was not available due to damage. The additional sites were often that could accommodate early voting in the community of Old Fort were being used for disaster relief or other accommodations to those who had been so devastated, and they were able to absorb the demands of early voting at the Marion County Board, at their County Board of Elections office in Marion. And so, I think what we were hearing yesterday were people who are professionals in this field asking their legislators to consult with them before they took action. None have resigned, but I do think that that would be our recommendation as we go forward. We worked very closely with the legislature as we developed the Disaster Relief Act and incorporating provisions from the state board's emergency resolution into that act. We did not have those same channels of communication happening as the legislation was considered yesterday. And I think that's what you're hearing. These folks are working long hours. They have prepared for this election. They prepared in a way that helped them to pivot when such devastation hit their communities. They have felt this personally. They live in these communities. Their homes, their family members have been affected. And so, it's a very trying time, and they are professionals. They want to do this right. They want to do this well, and they fear that there's going to be a point where you push so far and tempers are so high, and there's so much being pushed onto the work that they have to do that they will not carry it out well. And that's something that no one in a profession wants to do, is to not carry out their job well. But I know these folks, they are dedicated, they are resilient, and they have a compass that is to ensure that every eligible voter is able to cast their ballot. And they will work with that compass as their guiding force, and they will work with their board members and the members of their community to ensure that they adhere to the law that was passed yesterday.
Reminder, if you have a question, please put your name in the chat. We only have a couple left, so and we have a little more time. So if you have a question, please feel free to put your name in the chat. We're going to go to Will Michaels, WUNC. Will, you should be able to unmute. Will Michaels, are you there? Looks like he is. Go ahead, Will.
Early polling sites. I know that, excuse me, I know that you all have directed counties to take down ones that simply spread false information, but just wanted to see if I could get your reaction to some advocacy groups that have said, even the ones that that interpret the law correctly, should be taken down because they, as these groups say, target Latino voters who otherwise would be able to vote into perhaps not voting.
Whether it's these signs or there's been other communications in the past that, or organized events at early voting sites that people have questioned, we have a fine line that we have to walk. And that's between, accurate information, free speech, electioneering, and whether in any of that, there's voter intimidation or a restriction on First Amendment rights. And so that's the line that we're walking. The signs that have been put out that are accurate, there is no concern about those being placed as long as they are not being used in a way that, more than being placed for individuals to read if they choose to read or not to read, then we can proceed forward. But when there's inaccurate information that's conveyed, as was the case with some of the signs in an improper translation of the term non-citizen, that's when we had to intervene and say that those cannot be displayed. Paul, would you like to add anything to that?
No, that's correct. And the only thing I'll add to it is that, of course, as election officials, we recognize that, the people at the voting sites who are managing voting are the ones that are communicating what the rules are. And we encourage voters who have any questions about what the rules are to contact their actual election officials. Talk to their board of elections, talk to the voting site managers, their poll workers. And to a large extent, these signs are completely unnecessary because we already have in every voting site when you go in, here are the eligibility rules for voting posted up on the wall in large print. And every voter, when they go in to check in to vote, is going to sign an attestation that they meet all the qualifications to vote, including U.S. citizenship. So to a large degree, these signs are unnecessary, but as Karen said, even unnecessary signs when they're accurately communicating the law, absent some other compelling evidence of them being discriminatory or intimidating, then there's no real basis for election officials to remove them.
All right, let's go to Katie Nicholson. Katie, you should be able to unmute and ask your question. Katie, do you want to try again? Katie Nicholson. One more time, Katie. You can unmute and ask your question. If not, we'll move on. All right, we're going to move to Ricky Irving Jr. from CBS News. Ricky should be able to unmute and ask your question.
Breakdown of percentage of absentee ballots from those counties affected by the hurricane?
Yes, we can provide that data. Just send me an email. This is Pat Gannon. Just send me an email and we can provide that data.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Let's see. Ricky in the chat says, is there a breakdown of the percentage of civilian absentee ballots from the counties affected by the hurricane and which county has seen the highest turnout? Yeah, that'll all be in the data that we can provide to you. Katie, if you want to put your question in the chat. Oh, are you there?
Yes, it just let me unmute. It was a bit of a delayed process. I have a couple of questions. First of all, we've been talking to some folks who are displaced, and they expressed some concerns around voting with an absentee ballot because they said it might be more likely to be challenged. I wonder if you could comment on that first.
Of thousands of North Carolinians who cast their ballot absentee by mail. And there are no circumstances that being displaced is a reason to challenge someone who's from one of these affected counties. If they are a registered voter in North Carolina, in one of these affected counties, they should make the request through votebymail.ncsbe.gov. That there's an online form that allows them to make sure all the fields are completed correctly. It goes directly to their issuing county board of elections, and then we can get that out in the mail to them at whatever address they're able to receive mail. It does not have to go to their residence address because we know mail delivery may still be limited to some areas of our state. They can have it sent to a post office box. They can have it sent to a near relative, someone a friend they might be staying with at this point in time. And then they will go through the same process that any voter will go through in North Carolina, which is to complete their ballot, have witnesses sign that they were the individual who completed that ballot. They'll have those witnesses sign, they'll sign, that the ballot will be inserted into that return envelope with those signatures, and they'll also provide either a copy of their photo ID or complete the exception form. And that exception form includes that they may not be able to provide an ID because of being affected by a natural disaster. And so they can then put those return materials into that envelope, put it into the mailer envelope, and send it back to their county board of elections. The mail is running, but if they don't feel comfortable doing that, or it's easier for them to take it to the county board of elections where they may be temporarily living, or an early voting site, that is permissible for these affected voters. So we certainly encourage, and there is nothing about their circumstance that should be challenged. That's not the issue at hand.
Okay. My next question is really more of a process, and I guess for all of our understanding, given some of the exceptional circumstances, can you walk me through the journey that a ballot will make on election day up to the point where the results are reported? So from the moment that ballot is cast, what is its journey through the system before it becomes a part of a large set of results that are reported to us all?
Are you just wanting to know the path of a ballot on election day?
Essentially, yeah, on election night. Yeah.
Okay. So on election day, voters go to their precinct of residence. They look that up through their voter registration, and which is available at ncsbe.gov. They can also find a sample ballot by looking up their voter registration information. And they'll go to their precinct, they'll check in those poll books. They may be electronic poll books, or they may be our manual system, are designed to check in only voters who are assigned to that precinct or that polling location. So the bipartisan election officials will ask them to state their name and address when they check in to vote. They'll also ask them to present an acceptable form of ID. And at that point in time, if they don't have an acceptable form of ID, they will be offered an exception form. And at that point, they would cast a provisional ballot. There may be other circumstances if someone doesn't appear on the poll book where they would cast a provisional ballot. So that sends them to the help desk. But in a normal circumstance, the person states their name and their address, shows that ID. They go to the ballot station. They're issued the ballot. That's proper ballot style for them based upon their house district, their commissioner districts, things of that nature. They will be given the ballot. They'll go. They'll mark it, and they will review their ballot before they put it into the tabulator. And the tabulator will collect those ballots throughout the day. The polls close at 7:30 p.m. The bipartisan precinct officials will oversee the close of polls, the printing of the results tape. They will extract the media that contains the tabulation and secure that and follow the chain of custody procedures and document such as they collect their materials, the tabulation media, and return those to the County Board of Elections. And so at the County Board of Elections, there is an air-gapped election management system where they input the media from the various polling places, and those are aggregated to provide the results. With each set of results that they upload to the state board website, they save those to a clean USB stick on that air-gapped system. They transfer that USB stick to the state board system, which is secure, and they are able to upload, review the results before they publish, and the votes go live at that point. And we'll continue to do that until all the results are uploaded. That's the path of a ballot on election day. The other results that they would be doing the same processes with are certainly absentee by mail. They'll do that on the air-gapped system, election management system at 7:30 p.m. when the polls close. And then they'll be uploading the early voting results, similar fashion with the media sticks into that system as they're uploading precinct results.
I think everyone knows how elections work now. That was a very thorough response, Karen. All right. Mariah Davis has a question in the chat, but Mariah, her question is Eastern North Carolina specifically seeing record numbers of voting? We can provide those numbers as well. Mariah, just send me an email and we'll get you stats for the whole state. Who is next? Kurt Devine from CNN. Kurt, go ahead and unmute. Kurt, are you there? There we go.
Question. Karen, wondering if you can provide a snapshot of security precautions in place, particularly in the event of, say, a razor thin margin. Obviously, in other states in 2020, we saw all sorts of protests and rather heated tensions after the fact. And so I'm wondering if you can just, for a moment, spell out, number one, the kind of training that has already happened, whether it be tabletop exercises or things like that. And then also the way relationships with local law enforcement work and just, what is in place to be essentially deployed in the event that something like that takes place.
So we've seen things be pretty civil at our voting sites, and we hope that it remains that way. But if necessary, we do have the ability within our law for the chief voting official at those sites to call in law enforcement to help keep the peace or to deal with any disruptions that may be occurring. Again, we do not see this happening often, and that's been in place for any election, not just this election, given the environment that certainly we've seen elections be subjected to for the past few years. We are well aware of what our colleagues across the country faced in some of the rhetoric, the threats, the volatility following the 2020 election. And we know that we're a battleground state. where there are a lot of eyes on us, had there not even been the situation with Hurricane Helene. And so we have prepped them. We knew after things became more volatile following the 2020 election that we needed to work more closely with our local law enforcement and our emergency management officials. And so this has been an ongoing partnership at the local, state, and federal level to make sure that we are well prepared for cyber attacks or physical attacks that might come about. And so in terms of physical security, we published a pocket guide to local law enforcement. There is a training opportunity for them to learn about election law that's through the North Carolina Justice Academy. We have had ongoing conversations and trainings and things of that nature with the local law enforcement and state law enforcement officials. They've been part of our conferences at times so that we have those working relationships in place if need be. We hope that that's not the case, but we have seen them be, wonderful about helping with traffic control, about escorting our officials back when they felt unsafe or the conditions were not safe. We'll look at doing that again if necessary. We also, recognize that the environment has changed such that we need to secure our offices more. And so we have worked with our federal partners to conduct what are called safe assessments. These are physical security assessments, and they are, they're the same assessment, but they obviously look at each individual office for recommendations of how they can improve their physical security. So for some, that meant changing the access points, potentially having a keypad or a fingerprint keypad, something of that nature, to access areas where things needed to be secured. For some, it meant better doors being installed. Others, it meant panic buttons needing to be installed. And for some, it meant all of the above. We still want to make sure we have transparent processes. So many of the counties have set up glass enclosures where things are visible, but obviously can protect the workers and the board members as they try to carry out their bipartisan work in conducting the elections. And similarly, we have, just recognizing that sometimes it's how you respond in the situation. So we've worked with them on de-escalation techniques that they can also share with their workers at the voting sites. Because sometimes that's all that's really necessary is how you engage with a person who is upset and maybe, helping them just to take that tenor down in those environments. We also have obviously been subjected to hazardous materials being mailed to election offices. And so we have worked with our emergency management officials at the state and local level to understand how to handle hazardous materials and to make sure that we are in communication about what election law allows for and what other laws for a crime scene, if there's a hazardous material, would allow for, and how to work effectively together in those circumstances. And then, just learning from our state, federal, and local partners how to do more effective mail handling to make sure that our workers are safe as they process mail in case anyone has sent something maliciously or frightening to those officials. Luckily, though, all of this is very precautionary, and we see it as insurance measures that we hope that we don't have to exercise. And thus far, there's been very limited need to employ any of these techniques or practices that we have learned and taught to election officials. Pat, I noticed one question in the chat that I just want to make sure is clear to everyone about how the results are how the ballots are counted and where the ballots are counted. In North Carolina, our elections are conducted at the local level. The state board has oversight, and we certainly have a state system for aggregating and reporting results statewide, but the actual counting of ballots happens in those polling places and then are aggregated at the county level and then aggregated again at the state level. There are no counting of ballots at the State Board of Elections.
All right. Brianna Kramer from Carolina Journal. Brianna, I should be able to unmute. Looks like you're unmuted. You can go ahead and ask your question.
Back to the General Assembly's actions yesterday to expand voting sites. Legislators said McDowell and Henderson counties had more sites originally planned, but they just chose not to open them, even though there was no damage to some of the sites that they had planned. So, what was stopping them from opening more of their early voting sites?
That is absolutely incorrect. McDowell County did have an early voting site planned in Old Fort, to where they would have had 2 sites had Helene not happened, and the voting site was damaged. And then other opportunities for voting, those facilities that could adequately accommodate were being used for disaster relief efforts. In Henderson County, that county board of elections, in preparation for in developing their early voting plan for the presidential election, had adopted a unanimous plan for 1 voting site in Henderson County. And that's what they went into the presidential election prepared to have in place. They had a plan to accommodate the voters at that 1 site, which is their county board of elections office. And as you know, we saw with the devastation from Helene, they continued to operate and have that early voting site available. There are prior elections where they had additional early voting sites, but it is inaccurate to say that they had intended to have additional early voting sites. That is simply not the case. They had unanimously adopted a plan for 1 early voting site in Henderson County.
Just for clarity, that vote, that bipartisan unanimous vote occurred back in May, I believe. So well before the hurricane.
All right, we have looks like one more question in the chat. With the tent sites, do we know which ones might be the busiest or largest in these affected counties? Are there also addresses for these at the moment? We can get you that information, Chelsea, and anybody else who wants it. I believe we have. You know, it's changing pretty much daily where, you know, sites are coming back online and tents are no longer needed. But I think we have a pretty good handle on that now as to which ones will be, which sites will need tents. I think that's all. Did we miss anybody? I don't think so. But again, if you want some data on comparisons of early voting between 2020 and now, just please send me an email and we'll get that to you as soon as we can. I think that'll do it. We'll have a recording of this also available in a short time, and we'll post it to the Helene webpage. And if you want it, and you can't find it, just let me know and I'll send it to you. I'll send you a link. But I think that's it. Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everybody, for being here.
Thanks, everyone. And don't forget to go cast your ballot.
But only if you live in North Carolina. Here, that is.